When it comes to eating tomato soup, the only thing I want to accompany it is an old-fashioned grilled cheese sandwich. Today's grilled cheese episode is the second half to last week's tomato soup episode. Because if you're gonna make tomato soup, you have to serve it with grilled cheese sandwiches. I mean, come on. The vintage recipe I'm recreating is for these Velveeta Crisps from 1931. So let's take a minute and talk about Velveeta. Back in the 1890s, mass-produced cheese was just taking off. Before this time, cheese was usually made in what we would now call artisanal factories, basically small mom-and-pop cheese mills. To twist a phrase from the notorious B.I.G., mo cheese, mo problems, like broken or split wheels, which couldn't be sold to the public. Emile Frey, who is credited with inventing Velveeta cheese, was put in charge of figuring out a way to use these discarded cheese pieces. Mr. Frey discovered that by adding whey, a byproduct of making cheese, with salt and melting them together with the cheese pieces, the whole thing would form a solid blob when cooled. Then, when the concoction was reheated, the cheese product wouldn't split into oils and solids like non-processed cheese. And the texture was consistently smooth and, wait for it, velvety. Thus, Velveeta cheese was invented. Not only does Velveeta not separate when heated and have a creamy velvety texture, the taste is mild and inoffensive, something that Americans seem to gravitate towards when it comes to their food, especially in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. To make the Velveeta Crisps, begin by softening Velveeta over hot water. The original recipe doesn't explain how to do this, so I figure they meant us to use a double boiler. Next, the recipe calls for you to cut the bread into thin slices. Sliced bread was invented in 1928 by Otto Frederick Rohwedder of Davenport, Iowa, and it obviously hadn't quite caught on when this recipe was written. But I'm gonna go ahead and use pre-sliced bread. Next, cut off the crusts and then spread with the melted Velveeta. Roll up and skewer with toothpicks. Broil, turning often until they're golden brown. Good. You know what this tastes like? It tastes like a grilled cheese roll-up. I mean, it's literally just bread and Velveeta. You can't go wrong. It just tastes like a classic grilled cheese sandwich, but in a slightly different form. Tastes like the 1950s. Sometimes when you make grilled cheese, you can get like a bit of a grit from the oil and the solid separating. But this is smooth and consistent the whole way through, just like they said. Because I love the concept of rolling a grilled cheese sandwich, I'm gonna use a similar method. But the filling for my grilled cheese sandwich is gonna be a riff on the Caprese salad, which consists of tomatoes, cheese, and fresh basil. Last week I showed you how to make a roasted tomato and corn soup. If I'm gonna take up the time to roast off some tomatoes, I throw in a few extra and make a wonderful roasted tomato and goat cheese spread. Begin by combining 4 ounces of goat cheese and 4 ounces of cream cheese that have been brought to room temperature. Then mix in about half a cup of roasted tomatoes. Fold in around a 1/4 cup of chopped basil, plus salt and pepper to taste. To make the Caprese Rollups, start by slicing the crusts off a soft white bread. I used potato bread, but any soft bread will do. Then, using a rolling pin, carefully flatten the bread piece by piece. Cover one side of the bread in melted butter, and then smooth the Caprese spread over the other side and roll the whole thing up. Cook in a skillet for a few minutes on each side until golden. Serve with a roasted tomato and corn soup. Yeah, it's delicious. I don't have to tell you. Oh, if you like goat cheese and you like grilled cheese, it's like heaven. Especially when you dip it into the tomato soup. What I love about this in comparison to the Velveeta is it really has a full-bodied flavor from the tang of the goat cheese to the sweetness of the roasted tomato and the brightness of the basil. So much more flavor than you're ever gonna get from Velveeta. Delicious. Oftentimes, recipes from our past can seem pretty strange to our modern taste buds. But when it comes to grilled cheese, you can't go wrong no matter when you're eating them. If you liked any of the home goods in today's video, you can find them at my online store, retrodepot.co. Just click the link in the description box below. Today's grilled cheese episode is the second half to last week's. Wow, just went. Okay. Next, the recipe calls for you to cut the bread. Cut the bread. All right.
Action.
I hate you. Okay, do it again.
And action.
That was the biggest bite in the history of the world. Hold on. I'm like so full.